I stared at the insufficient funds notification on my phone screen, the bright white light blurring into a smear of cold, hard reality. Our house savings, $85,000, meticulously saved over 7 years, was gone. My husband, Mark, was currently at his office, likely basking in the news of his upcoming promotion to senior vice president, while I stood in the middle of our half-packed kitchen, surrounded by boxes that would now never move to our dream home. Mark was the perfect husband on paper, a dedicated provider, a loving father to our 7-year-old daughter Chloe, and a man whose integrity was supposedly his greatest asset. We were high school sweethearts. I had worked 2 jobs to put him through his MBA, believing that his success was our success. But as I sat on the cold tile floor, tracing the history of the bank transfers, the integrity began to rot. The money hadn't been lost to a bad investment or a gambling addiction. It had been funneled, month by month, into a private account held by a woman named Elena. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Nah. Who was Elena? I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I waited until he was asleep, his breathing deep and untroubled, and I used his thumb to unlock his phone. I felt like a criminal in my own home, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the device. What I found was a second life, so complete it felt like a parallel universe. There were photos of Mark. Mark, a playground with 2 toddlers who had his exact chin and eyes. There were messages to Elena calling her my beautiful wife and promising that the big move was coming soon. He wasn't saving for our house. He was buying theirs. He was supporting a second family with the money I had sacrificed my youth to help him earn. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. Every late night at the office and weekend conference flashed before my eyes, now revealed as lies. He had been living 2 lives, and I was the one funding the one he actually wanted. The most sickening part was the timing. Mark's company was throwing a massive gala in 3 days to celebrate his promotion. It was meant to be our crowning moment. He had already bought me a dress, a beautiful navy silk gown that now felt like a shroud. As the sun began to peek through the curtains, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure that when his 2 worlds finally collided, he was the one left standing in the wreckage. I spent the next 48 hours becoming a ghost. I hired a private investigator to find Elena's address. She didn't live in a shack. She lived in a charming suburban house 30 miles away, paid for by Mark's business expenses. I found out she didn't know about me either. To her, Mark was a high-flying consultant who traveled for work. She thought she was the only wife. I reached out to her under the guise of a corporate event planner for Mark's firm. My voice was steady, professional, and entirely devoid of the soul-crushing pain I felt inside. I told her that as part of Mark's promotion celebration, the company wanted to fly his entire family in for a surprise appearance at the gala. Elena was thrilled. She talked about how hard Mark worked and how much the kids missed him when he was traveling. Hearing her voice, so full of genuine affection for the man who was currently destroying my life, almost made me sick. But I held it together. I needed her there. I needed the kids there. I needed everyone. His boss, his parents, our friends. To see the man Mark truly was. On the night of the gala, I watched Mark get dressed. He looked handsome, his suit tailored to perfection, his smile radiant with the confidence of a man who thought he had won. "You okay, Sarah?" he asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "You've been a bit quiet today." "Just nerves." I lied, my voice as smooth as glass. "It's a big night for us. The biggest," he said, kissing my forehead. The touch made my skin crawl. We arrived at the venue, a grand ballroom dripping in crystal and gold. Mark was immediately swarmed by colleagues. I stood by his side, the perfect corporate wife, nodding and smiling as people congratulated us on our incredible partnership. I checked my phone. A text from the event transport I had arranged. "The guests have arrived. They are at the side entrance." My heart skipped a beat. The trap was set. Mark was at the podium now, his boss introducing him with a speech about family values and unwavering dedication. The room was silent, every eye on him. "And now," the CEO said, I'd like to invite Mark's family up to share in this moment. Mark looked at me, gesturing for me to come up. I didn't move. Instead, I pointed toward the back of the room, where the large double doors were swinging open. Elena walked in, holding the hands of two small children. She was wearing a beautiful white dress, her face beaming with pride. The room went dead silent as she began to walk down the center aisle toward the stage, her eyes locked on Mark. Mark's face didn't just go pale, it went gray. The microphone picked up his sharp, ragged intake of breath. He looked at Elena, then at me, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Daddy!" the youngest boy shouted, breaking the silence and one toward the stage. Mark stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis as his secret family stepped into the light of his greatest professional achievement. The silence in the ballroom was so thick it felt heavy, a suffocating blanket draped over 300 of the city's most influential people. Mark's boss, the CEO who had just finished praising Mark's unwavering dedication to family values, stood frozen with his hand still extended toward the podium. Elena took another step forward, her expression shifting from pure, radiant pride to a flickering, confused shadow. She looked at the giant screens displaying Mark's name and the words, Senior Vice President. Then back at Mark, who looked like a man watching his own execution. The two toddlers, tins, I realized with a fresh stab of agony, were now clinging to his legs. "Mark?" Elena's voice was small, but in the hushed room it carried like a shout. "What's going on? Who are all these people?" I didn't let him answer. I stepped forward, my navy silk dress rustling, a sound that felt like sandpaper against my skin. I forced a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes, the kind of smile you give a guest you've been expecting. "You must be Elena," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the lapel mic I was still wearing from my earlier thank you toast. "I'm Sarah, Mark's wife." The gasp that rippled through the room was audible, till Elena's face went completely slack. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide and pleading, waiting for him to tell her I was a crazy fan, a disgruntled employee, anything but the truth. But Mark couldn't speak. He was making a small, pathetic choking sound in the back of his throat. "Wife?" Elena whispered. "Mark? You said you were divorced. You said your ex lived in London and didn't want anything to do with you." I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. London? He had really gone on out on the backstory. "We've been married for 15 years, Elena," I said, stepping closer so I was just inches from her. "In fact, we were supposed to be closing on our dream home tomorrow. But I think you know more about where that money went than I do." The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked down at the children, then back at the man she thought was her husband. The betrayal was so fresh on her face that for a split second, I felt a twinge of pity for her. She was a victim of his greed just as much as I was. But then I remembered the $85,000. I remembered my daughter Chloe waiting at home with a babysitter, thinking her daddy was a hero. "Mark," I said, turning to him. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, but he was trapped on the stage. "The CEO was just talking about your integrity. Help. Why don't you tell him about the business expenses that's paid for Elena's mortgage? Or the conferences that were actually birthdays for these two?" The CEO finally found his voice. "Mark, is this true?" Mark finally broke. "Sarah, please," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Not here. Let's go home and talk about this. I can explain everything." "Explain it now," I commanded. "Explain to everyone here how you built a second life on the sacrifices I made. Explain to your boss why the company shouldn't fire you for embezzlement, because we both know you weren't just using our savings, Mark. That you were padding those expense reports, weren't you?" His silence was the loudest confession he could have made. The CEO's face hardened into a mask of professional disgust. He signaled to the security guards at the back of the room. But the night wasn't over. As the guards approached, a man I recognized from the private investigator's photos, Elena's brother, stepped out from behind her. He didn't look shocked. He looked livid. He had been the one suspicious of Mark's traveling for months. "You son of a..." he started, lunging toward the stage. The room erupted into chaos. People were standing on chairs, phones were out filming every second of the implosion, and the twins started wailing in terror. In the middle of the storm, I stood perfectly still. I had done it. I had pulled the thread, and the entire tapestry of Mark's lies had unraveled in less than 5 minutes. As security led a trembling, ruined Mark away, Elena collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. I walked over to her and handed her a card for a lawyer, but for the private investigator I had used. He lied to both of us, I said quietly, the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a hollow, aching void. But he's not going to ruin anyone else. I walked out of that ballroom without looking back. I felt lighter, but as I stepped into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our shared bank account. Transaction alert. $50,000 withdrawal pending. My blood ran cold. Mark hadn't just been saving for a house. He had a contingency plan I hadn't found. And it looked like he was trying to take the last of what we had left before the police could freeze his assets. The notification glowed on my phone like a toxic ember. $50,000. Pending. My breath hitched. I had thought the gala was the endgame, the final strike that would leave Mark in the dust. But while I was orchestrating a public execution of his reputation, Mark had been preparing a trapdoor. He wasn't just a liar. He was a rat who had smelled the smoke before the fire even started. I stood on the sidewalk outside the venue, the muffled sounds of the ongoing chaos inside. The shouting, the crying, the frantic whispers of the social elite, fading into a dull huff. I had to move. If that transaction cleared, he'd have enough to vanish, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a daughter whose future he had already sold. I sprinted toward my car, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. My mind was racing. Where would he go? He couldn't go back to our house. The police would likely be there soon if the chief executive officer followed through on the embezzlement charges. He wouldn't go to Elena's. That bridge wasn't just burned, it was vaporized. As I pulled out into traffic, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. "Sarah," a voice hissed. It was Elena. Her voice was thick with tears, but the softness I'd heard earlier was replaced by a jagged, desperate edge. "He's here." Or he was. He just called me from a burner phone. He told me to pack the kids' bags. He said he has a place in the Caymans. He told me if I didn't come with him, I'd never see a dime of support again. "Elena, listen to me," I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Did he say where he was meeting you?" "The private airfield," she choked out. "The un near the industrial park." "Sarah," he sounded like a different person. "He told me he'd handle you if I told anyone." "Stay where you are, Elena. Call the police." "I'm going there." "Sarah, don't." "He's dangerous when he's cornered." I hung up. Dangerous? I had spent 15 years building a life with a man I didn't even know. I had been the one who managed the schedules, the finances, and the emotional labor of our entire family while he played house with another woman. If anyone was dangerous, it was the woman who had nothing left to lose but her daughter's security. The industrial park was a labyrinth of corrugated metal and flickering streetlights. I drove with my headlights off, the ghost of the MacBook Air MT I used for my own work projects sitting in the passenger seat. A reminder of the digital trail I had used to find him in the first place. Mark thought he was tech-savvy, but I was the one who had spent my nights learning the nuances of local artificial intelligence and data tracking for my own creative outlets. I saw his car, a sleek, black sedan he'd claimed was a company perk, parked near a small, unassuming hangar. A light was on, inside. I parked a block away and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. My heart was a drum in my ears. As I reached the side of the hangar, I heard voices. Mark's was high-pitched, frantic. "It's not enough. I need the offshore codes." I peered through a cracked window. Mark was pacing, holding a laptop. Opposite him was a man I didn't recognize, a fixer, probably. The kind of person you hire when you need to disappear. "The codes are in the encrypted drive at your house, Mark," the man said calmly. "You should have grabbed it before the circus started at the gala." I couldn't. Sarah, she knew. She knew everything. She set me up. Mark slammed his fist onto a metal table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "She thinks she won. She thinks she can just take my life away. But I've worked too hard for this. I'm not going back to being the guy who lives in a cramped apartment and counts pennies." You're going to jail if we don't move, the man countered. I felt a surge of cold fury. He was still the victim in his own head. He truly believed he deserved the luxury he had stolen from us. I looked at the $50,000 pending notification on my phone. It was still there. Pending. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police yet. I called the bank's fraud department. I had the power of attorney. I had the joint account access he thought he'd locked me out of. Yes, I'd like to report a fraudulent transfer, I whispered into the phone, my eyes fixed on Mark through the glass. Account ending in 4492. It's a forced withdrawal. Cancel it immediately and freeze the account. I watched him. Seconds later, his phone buzzed. He looked at it, and the expression that crossed his face was pure, unadulterated horror. No! 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 He screamed, throwing the phone against the hangar wall. What happened? The fixer asked. She froze it. She froze everything. That was the exit money. This was the dark moment. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by a snarling, panicked animal. He looked at the fixus, then at the door. We have to go back, Mark said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, low growl. She's at the house. She's probably there with the kid. I know where she keeps the backup drive. I'll get it, and then we leave. Mark. That's suicide, the fixus said. I don't care. I'm not losing everything to her. He turned toward the door, and for a split second our eyes met through the grimy glass of the window. His face contorted into something unrecognizable, a mask of pure hatred. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back to my car. I had to get to Chloe. I had to get to the house before he did. But as I fumbled with my keys, I heard his engine roar to life. He wasn't going to the house to talk. He was going there to burn it all down. I sped out of the industrial park, my mind a blur of what-ifs. I had initiated this revenge to humiliate him, to get justice. But I hadn't realized that when you poke a cornered rat, it doesn't just run, it bites. I reached for my phone to call the babysitter, my hands shaking. Pick up, pick up, pick up, I pleaded. The line went to voicemail. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal insult. I could see the headlines in my head, the kind of stories I used to recap for my YouTube projects, now becoming my own reality. The betrayal had deepened into something far more dangerous than financial ruin. Was a threat to the only thing I had left. As I turned onto our street, I saw the headlights of a black sedan idling in front of my driveway. Mark was already there. The sight of Mark's black sedan idling in front of our home turned my blood to ice. He wasn't hiding anymore. The man who had spent years crafting a shadow life was now standing in the glare of the streetlights, a frantic, jagged version of the husband I once knew. I slammed my car into park 2 houses down, barely killing the engine before I was out the door. My only thought was Chloe. The house was dark except for the flickering blue light of the television in the living room. The babysitter, a local college girl, was likely oblivious to the monster sitting at the curb. I saw Mark step out of his car. He wasn't moving toward the front door. He was headed for the side gate that led to my home office, the place where I kept my MacBook Air M2 and the physical backup drives for my video projects. He knew my routine. He knew where the digital gold was buried. I didn't call out to him, Juice. I slipped through the neighbor's yard, my navy dress snagging on a rose bush, the silk tearing with a soft hiss that felt like a scream in the quiet neighborhood. I reached the side of the house just as Mark was fumbling with the lock on the office door. Mark, I hissed, the word catching in my throat. He spun around, his eyes wide and bloodshot. In the dim light, he looked like a ghost of himself. Where is it, Sarah? Where's the drive? It's over, Mark. The police are on their way. Elena called them. I called them. You need to leave before this gets worse. It can't get worse, he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice to a terrifying, vibrating whisper. You ruined me. You took the money. You took the promotion. You took my kids. I have nothing left to lose, Sarah. Do you understand that? Nothing. He stepped toward me, and I realized he was holding a heavy metal flashlight, the one we kept in the kitchen for emergencies. I'm taking that drive. It has the crypto keys. It has the only thing that's going to keep me from rotting in a cell. Give me the key to the office. I don't have it, I lied, backing away. Don't lie to me, he lunged, grabbing my arm. His grip was like a vice, bruising the skin. I saw you packing. I know you moved the files. Give it to me, or I swear to God, I'll wake up the whole neighborhood and tell them you're the one who's been skimming from the firm. They won't believe you, Mark. They saw the gala. They saw Elena. His face contorted. Mentioning her name was like throwing gasoline on a fire. He shoved me against the siding of the house, the rough wood scraping my back. Elena was a mistake. You? You were an investment. And I'm cashing out. Suddenly, the side door of the house creaked open. It wasn't the office door, it was the laundry room entrance. Chloe stood there, rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit dangling from her hand. Mommy? Daddy? Why are you shouting? The air left the world. Mark froze. His hand still clamped on my arm. For a second. The animal in his eyes retreated, replaced by a flicker of the father who used to tuck her in every night. But it was fleeting. The desperation was deeper than the love. Go back inside, Chloe, I said, my voice shaking. Everything is fine. Daddy and I are we just talking about work. Daddy, you're hurting Mommy, Chloe said, her voice small and trembling. Mark let go of me as if I were red hot. He looked at his hands, then at his daughter. This was the turning point. The realization of what he had become seemed to hit him, but instead of surrendering, he broke. He didn't look at us again. He turned and sprinted back toward his car. Mark, wait! I cried out, but he was already peeling away, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I grabbed Chloe and pulled her inside, locking every door and window with trembling fingers. I called the babysitter who had fallen asleep on the sofa and told her to go home immediately after the police arrived. Then I sat on the floor with Chloe, hold her until her breathing leveled out into sleep. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor who had just seen the true face of the enemy. I walked into my office and opened my MacBook Air M2. I didn't need the physical drive Mark was looking for. I had moved everything to a secure cloud server days ago when I first found the bank transfers. I began to type. I wasn't writing a script for a movie recap this time. I was writing a statement. I was compiling every screenshot, every forged expense report, and every message he had sent to Elena. I used the local AI tools I had mastered for my YouTube channel to organize the data into a chronological map of his betrayal. As the sun began to rise, a new plan formed. Mark was run, but he was run blind. He thought he could disappear, but in the digital age, nobody disappears unless they have help. And the only person who could help him, fixer at the hangar, was someone I had already identified through my investigator. I realized I held more than just the money. I held the narrative. Mark had tried to cash out on us, but I was about to make sure his currency was worthless everywhere he went. I wasn't just going to report him, I was going to hunt him. The morning light was cold and unforgiving, spilling across my desk as I stared at the digital trail Mark had left behind. He was a man of patterns, and even in his panic, he couldn't help but follow them. While Chloe slept fitfully on the sofa, I worked with a clinical focus. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was an architect of consequences. I reached out to the fixer I had seen at the hangar. Using a burner account and the information my investigator had gathered, I sent him a single file, a screenshot of the frozen $50,000 transfer alongside a list of the embezzlement evidence I was currently uploading to the authorities. My message was simple. Mark is a liability. If you help him, you're an accessory to a federal crime. If you give me his location, I'll ensure your name stays out of the statements. Professional fixes don't have loyalty. They have risk assessments. 10 minutes later, a set of coordinates appeared on my screen. Mark wasn't at the airport. He was at a small, run-down motel on the edge of the county. A place we used to pass on our way to his parents' house. It was poetic in a twisted way. He was hiding in the shadows of our past. I called my mother to come watch Chloe, and as soon as she arrived, I headed out. I wasn't going to the police yet. I needed to see him. I needed to look him in the eye on last time when he realized there was nowhere left to run. The motel was a relic of the 70s, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a trapped insect. Mark's black sedan was parked around back, hidden behind a dumpster. I checked the room number the fixes had provided, room 14. I walked up to the door and knocked. I didn't hide. I didn't whisper. Open the door, Mark. The silence from inside was deafening. Then, the sound of a chain being slid back. The door opened a crack, and Mark peered out. He looked 10 years older than he had at the gala. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and his eyes were hollowed out by exhaustion and fear. "Sarah?" he whispered. How did you find me?" "You're not as clever as you think you are," I said, pushing the door open and stepping into the cramped, stale-smelling room. "The fixes sold you out for a chance at immunity. Elena is giving a statement right now. And your boss? He's currently going through your business expense history with a forensic accountant." Mark collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I just wanted more, Sarah. And I wanted to give you and Chloe everything. It got away from me." "Don't you dare use our daughter to justify this," I snapped. "You didn't do this for us. You did this because you're a coward who couldn't handle the reality of a normal life. You wanted two of everything, two wives, two families, two identities, and now you have nothing." Mark looked up, and for a second a flicker of the old, manipulative Mark returned. "I still have the drive, Sarah. The what from the office. I grabbed it while you were inside with Chloe. You missed it. I have the crypto keys. I can still make this right for you. We can go away. All of us. You, me, Chloe, even Elena if that's what it takes to keep the peace." I looked at the small black USB drive he was clutching like a lifeline. I almost laughed. "Mark, check the serial number on that drive." He looked down, his brow furrowing. "That's not the backup drive," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, steady tone. "That's a dummy drive I keep in my desk for testing scripts. It's empty." "The real one?" "It's currently in a safe deposit box at a bank you don't have access to." The final light in his eyes went out. The last shocking twist of his secret life was that I had been 3 steps ahead of him from the very first moment I saw that insufficient funds notification. "It's over," I said. Just then, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. I had called the police the moment I pulled into the motel parking lot. Mark didn't move. He didn't try to run. He just sat there, staring at the empty plastic drive in his hand, a man who had gambled his entire soul and lost it to a dummy file. As the blue and red lights began to flash against the motel's yellowed curtains, I turned toward the door. "Wait," Mark cried out, his voice cracking. "Sarah, please. What am I supposed to tell Chloe?" I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage of the man I had loved for 15 years. "Tell her the truth, Mark," I said. "If you can even remember what that sounds like." The heavy thud of the motel door closing behind me felt like the final period at the end of a long, agonizing sentence. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carried the scent of rain and exhaust, a stark contrast to the stagnant, lie-filled room I had just escaped. I watched from the edge of the parking lot as the officers moved in. Their movements practiced and efficient. Mark didn't fight. He didn't even look up as they led him to the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind the back that had once held our daughter. I drove home in a daze, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. I thought about the house savings, the $85,000 that were gone, and the $50,000 I had managed to save at the last second. It wasn't enough to buy the dream home, but it was enough to start over. It was enough for a deposit on a smaller place, a place that would belong only to Chloe and me. When I walked through my front door, the house was quiet. My mother was in the kitchen, quietly making tea. She looked at me, seeing the tear in my dress and the hollow look in my eyes, and simply opened her arms. I collapsed into them, finally letting the tears come, not for Mark, but for the 15 years of my life that had been a beautiful, orchestrated lie. "He's gone," I whispered into her shoulder. "I know, honey," she said. "He's gone." A week later, the dust began to settle. The story of the gala takedown had gone viral in local circles, and the firm had issued a formal statement distancing themselves from Mark. Elena had reached out to me. We met at a quiet park, far away from the suburbs and the secrets. She looked tired, but resolute. Just she told me she was moving back to her parents' house in another state. She was taking the kids and starting over, just like me. We didn't become best friends, but in that moment, we were allies in a war we never asked to fight. I spent the next month meticulously untangling our lives. I sold the company perk car, closed the joint accounts, and filed for a divorce that would be as swift and surgical as my revenge. Every document I signed felt like shedding a layer of a skin that no longer fit. One afternoon, while I was packing the last of my office, I found an old photo of Mark and me from high school. We looked so young, so full of a future that hadn't been poisoned yet. I realized then that the man in that photo wasn't the man who had stolen our savings. That man was a ghost I had been in love with. The real Mark was the one sitting in a cell, waiting for a trial that would expose every corner of his greed. I looked at my MacBook Air M2, the tool I had used to dismantle his world. I realized I had a choice. I could let this betrayal define the rest of my life, or I could use the strength I found in the wreckage to build something real. I opened my channel dashboard. I didn't want to recap other people's dramas anymore. I wanted to tell stories of resilience, of women who find their voice when the world tries to silence them. The final payoff didn't come from the bank or the court. It came on a Tuesday afternoon when I took Chloe to see our new apartment. It was small, with mismatched floors and a view of a park instead of a golf course. But as she ran from room to room deciding where her stuffed rabbit would live, she stopped and looked at me with a wide, genuine smile. "Mommy, I like this house," she said. "It feels happy." "It does, doesn't it?" I replied, pulling her into a hug. I had lost the money, the house, and the husband I thought I knew. But in the ruins, I had found the one thing Mark could never steal: my own worth. As we stood in our new, sun-drenched living room, I knew that the revenge was over. The healing was just beginning. I looked at the camera lens of my phone, framing a shot of our new bin for my first real vlog. "My name is Sarah," I said to the recording, "and this is how I got my life back."